Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about how to reduce the time spent in meetings. And this is a response to a specific question that came in around how much time is too much, and I suppose what's normal in a leadership role. So we thought this is definitely something that we should discuss because we all know meetings. There's so many meetings. There's meetings for meetings, and the meetings can really take up a huge chunk of time and really stop you from being effective in your role. So we're going to unpack it all today, aren't we? So Jackie, let's kick off with why is spending so much time in meetings such an issue?
There's a number of factors that come into this. So sometimes there is genuinely an issue in that so much of your time is spent in meetings that you don't then have time to do the other elements of your role. But also it's because time in meetings can feel like a drain rather than an energizer. It doesn't feel like meetings are always productive. It feels that you can be spending so much time pinging back to back in meetings that you don't even have time to think. So when you do have time that's not in meetings, your brain's just trying to recuperate and get back to an even keel. So I think some of it is genuinely about how much time is reasonable and how should that time be spent. And some of it is about having better meetings so that time actually feels productive and delivers a result rather than just create busy work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a thing, isn't it? Because when you are going through the week and there's so many meetings, it does really stop you from having that space to think and the space to do the other work that you need to do. So I suppose if we're looking at meetings generally, like how long is too long? What is or what should a normal amount of meetings look like if you look at a week in isolation?
And it was interesting because when this question came in, there was quite a varied response. And when you look at the stats about what is normal, that was really reflected in the responses to this question. So I think first off, it's important to say it varies hugely depending upon your role, depending upon your level, depending upon your company or organization. But as a rule of thumb, if you are becoming more senior in your career, then you should probably expect that the more senior you become, the bigger the proportion of your working week that will be spent within meetings. So at an initial management level, you can probably expect, give or take, 20 to 40%, probably 25 to 30 is about typical. If you're at a leadership level, if you're moving from a management role up to a leadership level, then you're probably looking closer between 40 and 50. And if you're at a very senior level, if you're CEO, C-suite type level, then you're probably talking in excess of 50 and maybe around 60 to 70% of your working week will be spent in meetings of some kind. And those meetings can be brief meetings, they can be one-to-one meetings, they can be project meetings, they can be strategic meetings. There's a whole raft of different types and formats and lengths of meetings that will make up that overall number. But probably rule of thumb, I think those feel that they've been fairly reflective with most of my clients and with responses that I've seen from others as well.
Yeah, and that does sound like a fair kind of split depending on the level that you're in. And I suppose that the other thing is, if you're thinking, all I do is spend my time in meetings, am I actually spending too long in meetings, or is this just because it's the level that I'm at and the job that I'm doing? So, what would you say the signs are that you're spending too long in meetings? Like, what can you look for and start like really digging a little bit deeper and thinking, am I spending too long, or is this just part of my role?
So the 7 signs, and when I dig with clients or talk to people in leadership development workshops, these are some of the things that I encourage people to think about as signs that potentially they could reduce the time spent in meetings. First and foremost is if there's no opportunity in your calendar. We've talked so many different episodes about the importance of blocking time and having good quality thinking time within your working week. And if your meetings are chopped here, there, and everywhere in your diary, and your week is so full that you are not having opportunity for focus time, then that's a sign that either you need fewer meetings or you need to organize when and how those meetings are structured differently to be able to create that thinking time. So I think that's the first sign. And that's often, I think, instinctively where people ask that question of themselves. It's often that sense of, I just feel so busy with meetings, I've got no time to do anything else. So I think that's often the first sign that people would notice. Another pattern that I see, and particularly as people get more senior, is when all of your actual work is done before or after regular office hours. So you feel like your only opportunity for focus time is before 9 or after 5, or whatever the equivalent working hours are. So you're doing that work once all the meetings are finished, and in theory, when the working day is finished. And that's certainly a pattern, again, that I see repeated time and time again. Then you've got the things where you want to be able to plan a meeting, but actually your calendar is so chocker that maybe there's 2 or 3 of you that want to meet. Because everybody's diary is so chocker, you look in 2 or 3 weeks down the line before you can actually find a suitable meeting time where everybody can get together. So these are some of the things that kind of start to come to the fore. You've then got things like frustration or burnout, where I remember an HR director talking to me and saying, I feel like human pinball. I'm just literally pinging from meeting to meeting. My entire day is back to back meetings. And then you end up with this kind of frustration, with burnout, with your mind is wandering in one meeting because you're thinking about the next or you're thinking about the last one. So you're not present in the meetings that you are actually in. Or then you might be going to meetings where you're listening, but you're not actually contributing or gaining any value from being there. So the time that you're spending in meetings is not adding value by you being there or giving you value by you being there. And then the last couple is, again, meeting Groundhog Day, where you're listening to that same conversation time and time again, and you're having maybe regular meetings or update meetings, and it is just like Groundhog Day. You're hearing the same things, and things are just not moving on. And another one that I've probably only really recognized more recently with clients is this pattern of having huge amounts of your time when you're not in meetings is preparing for the meetings that you are in. So this can be preparing detailed reports or board packs, and it can actually be reading all the material or kind of reviewing all the material that has been put together for other people's contributions within those meetings as well. So if a huge amount of your time outside meetings is doing those things, then that's a sign that between that and the actual meetings, you probably haven't got much other time.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like when you've got loads of meetings in, and then the meetings just seem to come back around really quickly, don't they? And then you're panicking, thinking, I still haven't done the actions from the last meeting because there hasn't been enough time. And it's hard, isn't it? Trying to refocus. And I suppose you get yourself stuck in that cycle of just carrying on, keep going, keep pushing on. And I suppose this is a good point, isn't it? To take a breather and go, okay, can I relate to any of those signs? And what can I do? So I suppose the next thing to talk about really is, what can you do if you relate or you recognize any of these signs and you realize that you're spending too much time in meetings? What can you do?
have a framework for this. There are 4 Ds that I talk about that can be approaches that you can use. And in an ideal world, you'll use several of these rather than just one. But if we break them down one by one and explore each one first. So the first is to ditch. And this is about looking in your calendar. And particularly, this tends to be the meetings that are perhaps your own meetings that you've set up or team meetings that you have with members of your team. And it's looking at what is the purpose of these meetings and how effective are these meetings and do they still need to be in the diary? So the kind of simplest way to free up time from meetings is to remove unnecessary meetings from your calendar. And that can be looking, so in particular, I encourage people to look at recurring meetings and to look at, are those meetings serving their purpose? Because a lot of recurring meetings get put in, they, like you've just described so perfectly, roll around really quickly. And often there isn't necessarily a clear purpose for each one. It's just been put in there as regular time. They don't necessarily always feel productive. And it can be that you need the meeting, but you don't need it as often. So, for example, it could be that when you've started working somewhere, you might want to have a team meeting every week or every other week with the members of your team because there's a lot of stuff to get yourself up to speed on and to build relationships. So we did the episode previously about how not to have shit meetings. And one of the things we talked about within that was the framework of POP, which is purpose, outcomes, and process. And that means starting and understanding for every meeting in your calendar, there should be a clear purpose, a clear reason why that meeting is being held. And if that's not the case or it's shifted, then review it, change the frequency, ditch it altogether if needs be.
Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense, doesn't it? Because I suppose that's the first point, isn't it? Where you write what is necessary and what is unnecessary. Because until you do that analysis on the meetings that you have in, it's hard to know what takes priority, what is important, what actually needs to happen. And once you've analysed the meetings and what happens within those, that can also be the basis of starting to push back and ask questions. And are these meetings really necessary? Do we need to have them on a weekly basis? Could it be a monthly update or whatever it is? But it just gives you that space, doesn't it, to think, is it necessary or not?
And in terms of purpose, one thing that I heard fairly recently, is that a meeting should have predominantly one of 4 purposes. So it should either be to learn, to decide, to bond, or to do.
Oh,
so
love that. I love that.
It's simple, isn't it? We love simple.
Brilliant, yeah.
And so if you recognize that with your recurring meetings, like the example I gave, in the early days with a newly formed team, it can be important to have more frequent contact in order to have more of that bonding time. And certainly when everybody was working remotely, for example, it might have been that people didn't have that catch-up time. So you maybe needed some of that bonding time within the week that was scheduled so that everybody did come together, because you could go weeks without everybody being together. But it doesn't necessarily remain the same over time. And similarly with things like one-to-ones with your team members, it might be that you don't need those as often with one person as you do with somebody else. So many of those things can change over time. And that's where recurring meetings are such a good opportunity to review, because a lot of these things that just happen repeatedly had one purpose that they were serving at the point that they were created. And that purpose maybe isn't needed or isn't needed as frequently. So yeah, be really clear on the purpose and make sure that you only have meetings that do have a reason for them to be needed.
Yeah, definitely. So what's the next thing then that people can do?
So the next one is about looking at declining meetings. So this is the meetings where they're not your meeting. You're not the person that's setting up or running the meeting. You don't own it as such. but where you are looking at, do I need to spend time? And a lot of the people that I work with they're really nice people and they work with other nice people. And what can happen when people are nice and they get on and they're agreeable is that they want to involve people. And what that can then translate to is that you came to a meeting once and then you're invited to every time that meeting happens again. And this isn't necessarily that you need to just start declining meetings and saying to people, not coming to your stupid meeting, bye. This is about being clear on, again, the purpose, not just the purpose for the meeting, but the purpose for you being at the meeting. And if you're not needed for that meeting, or if you're not needed for the whole of that meeting, is there a different way that you can input to that meeting? And I think sometimes you can feel like you've got to accept a meeting request, but you don't even really know why you're accepting that meeting request. You don't know what the agenda is. You don't know why you're needed as part of that meeting. And this can happen in organizations where meeting culture is just, we just put meetings in and there is no clarity. But yeah, I think it's important that you understand what your reason is for being there and are willing to challenge. If you don't believe you need to be there, then let that person give you a reason, be open to, you might need to either prepare or provide something for it, be there for the whole meeting or be there for part of it. But there's a real big opportunity for a lot of people to highlight that if I'm not adding value and I'm not gaining value, then my time would be better spent somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with that as well, one of the things that I used to do is I used to ask the question, what do you actually need from me in this meeting? And where possible, I would maybe send one of my direct reports so that they could go and be the presence in the room. They could bring back any information. And it was a great development opportunity for them as well. So I suppose that's always another option as well. If they just want your presence in the room for whatever reason that is, just maybe so that they're not repeating things or whatever, at least then it gives you the opportunity to help support someone else's development while providing that presence without completely declining that meeting as well.
Yeah. And that can be really helpful there are other people sometimes who want to be in those meetings and who are more relevant to be in those meetings. Sometimes it is better for someone who is closer to the detail to be able to give input in a meeting. And I've certainly been the person that's been in meetings where I'm asked questions and I need to talk with my team to be able to answer that question for you. So definitely it can be better for someone else to be there and be a part of that. And like you say, that can also feel a real positive for somebody else that they can represent you or represent the team or just represent themselves and have that opportunity to interact with people who are maybe from other functions or a more senior level. So yeah, completely support that.
Fab. So the third one, this is my favorite part of your framework with this. So what's the third thing that people can do?
So the third thing is about designing the meetings. So again, this comes back to the meetings where you have that capability, where you have that opportunity to be able to design the meetings so that they are more productive, so that they are more energizing. And a lot of this we did cover when we talked about how not to have shit meetings. They're very simple things. So having that framework, having that clarity on what's the purpose for the meeting, what outcomes do we need to have, and what structure does it need to work to. Having some clarity as well about expectations of the prep that might be required so that other people know what they can bring so that you can move that conversation through the meeting. So particularly if you need to make decisions within meetings, which is often the purpose of meetings, then if everybody is prepared and understands what decisions need to be made, then that's really helpful to frame it. And on that note, a real specific with this that I really like is when you're framing the agenda, instead of having discussion points, have questions that need to be answered. So instead of writing an agenda and circulate it and saying, we're going to discuss XYZ project, be specific about what are the decisions that need to be made within this meeting on that project. So it could be about the resource capability needed for the next phase of this project and which areas of the business are going to be needed. It could be about, I don't know, the operational challenges and sharing an understanding of the operational challenges that we're going to have when we get to the implementation phase. But when you frame your agenda points as questions, it creates our brains naturally hook into that sense of, oh, what do I think about that question? And your brain naturally starts to try and answer that question. So instead of just reading it as it's a discussion point and your brain just files it as, okay, yeah, we'll have a chat about it on the day, it gets people preparing in a way that doesn't feel like you're asking them to do work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the other things as well that I like to do is if there is a discussion point, so if it is just an update, putting a time limit against that so that if somebody is there and it's their job to give an update, it's like a 60-second update or a 2-minute update. And they know exactly then how long they've got. Because I think sometimes meetings can run over because people will run away with their updates. And I absolutely love the switching it to questions rather than just discussion points. And I think the more specific that you can be, the easier the meetings will be, the more enjoyable meetings will be, because you'll go into that meeting, it's got structure, you know what to expect, you know the updates aren't going to run away with themselves, and you can go into that meeting in a real positive mindset. I think sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a lot of meetings, it can become quite negative and you're like, not another meeting, or I don't particularly like this meeting because I know it goes on and I don't know where it stops. And all I can think about is all of the stuff that I'm not doing while I'm sat there listening to people droning on about different things. So I absolutely love that reframe.
And I think when you're designing your own meetings as well, a big part of is reflect on how specific am I being with other people about the contribution I would like them to make. So when we were talking about declining meetings, we said, ask that question, what contribution do you want from me? What is it that you need from me? But this way, when you're designing meetings, you can avoid the need for that question to be asked because you can be really clear on this person needs to be there to make this contribution. And so often I have seen with clients where they are going into meetings for the first time and they're apprehensive because there's a real lack of clarity. So it is give an update on the marketing strategy, give an update on the financial performance, give an update on this. And it's so broad. And so often then the question gets asked of other people outside the business, what the hell shall I include? And in reality, don't just ask someone to give an update, be clear on what do you want to know? What questions do you want answered from their segment? And that makes it so much quicker and easier for them to prepare, frees up their time outside of meetings because they don't need to spend as long. It also makes it more relevant and more interesting because you're only hearing the things that you actually want to hear within that segment.
Yeah, I think that's perfect because, again, that just helps streamline those meetings, doesn't it? And it gives everybody the clarity. And it's just a total different way of running meetings, isn't it? Like most of the meetings that we know, I was going to say love, but I think most of the meetings that we know and hate are the ones that run away with themselves, that are not specific, they've got no clarity, that we worry about going into, that once we're in there, we're thinking, when is this going to end? This is not relevant to me and all the rest of it. Whereas if it's really specific, really punchy, it's just a totally different experience, isn't it? And if you have got to do that many meetings because they are all necessary for you to be there, at least if they're running that way, that they are really punchy and structured and enjoyable to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know our previous episode, I remember having feedback from a listener who said every single meeting that they put into other people's calendar now, they include in the invite the purpose of this meeting is, and they've really seen a difference in terms of how they're perceived in the workplace, because it's impacting them and allowing them to design their meetings better. But it's also been really helpful. And then people have started to adopt that elsewhere in the organization because they've seen that and gone, oh, actually, I like that. I'm going to start using that myself.
Yeah, and I think that really helps as well with the attendance rates, because sometimes people won't even ask you what this meeting's about. They'll just go, oh, I've got too many things in this week, so I'm just going to decline it. And actually, you might really need that person there. So I think adopting that way of doing things really helps, because if you know what you're going into, if you know what your contribution is, then that makes it easier for you. It makes it easier for the people in the meeting. It makes it easier for the host. There's just so many different ways that you can make your life easier. And if you have got to spend time in meetings, make it simpler. It's that old saying, isn't it? Like, work smarter rather than harder. And I suppose that is essentially what we're saying with this. You've got to do it smarter, and where you can, reduce the time and free up more time for yourself so that you can make more impact. So I suppose overall, there's no downside to being more specific and being more intentional about the meetings that you go to and the meetings that you also set up. So what is the final thing then? What is the fourth D in the framework?
So the fourth D, so your favorite was design, and my favorite is this one, which is drive, and drive improvement in meeting culture. And this follows on from what I was just saying about when one person improves how they design, then actually that can start to get adopted. And I think often when people feel really exhausted by how many meetings they're in and how much time they are spending in meetings, it's because the meeting culture of the business or organization as a whole is pretty poor. And so with this, it's about looking at how can you influence and drive improvement in some of the general principles. And there's been some really interesting studies around meetings and meeting culture. And one looked at the improvements in productivity by having 1 day a week meeting free. And I think this ties back to that first sign that we were talking about, that the sign you're spending too much time is when you don't have opportunity for focus time. If you can, even within your own team, have an agreement that we don't have meetings on a Friday or we don't have meetings on a Thursday, whatever, it doesn't matter what day, then everybody knows not to put those meetings in. And if you can seek to influence that more broadly, then that starts to really create that situation where there is a real different feeling. And if you, for example, share with other people how much of a difference it's made when you've looked at your recurring meetings and reduced how many recurring meetings you're attending, or you're asking that question of what is the purpose of this meeting? What do you want me to contribute? All of those things start to really help for you to be prompting questions, challenging maybe, depends how you feel about the meeting culture more generally. And just some really simple things with things like this that can become really good principles is just to make sure that there is that clarity on every meeting in this organization should have an agenda. Every meeting should have notes circulated after, and you can do that now. We both use Fathom AI, which is an artificial intelligence note taker. Teams has its own, Zoom has its own. There's numerous different pieces of software that can transcribe and summarize notes and actions. So you don't have to have somebody doing this as a big task. But what you can do is then make sure that people that attended the meeting have got those done really quickly and easily so that they can refer back to them. But also it can then allow you to keep people informed who perhaps didn't need to be there, but do need to know the outcome from that meeting. So I think it's really looking at opportunities to ask questions and be a role model. And if you can, directly challenge and suggest how, as an organization, we can start to take some of these things and improve our overall meeting culture.
Yeah, I think I absolutely love that, because I do feel like it will make a huge difference to everybody that starts to think about doing this, starts to think about being more intentional with their meetings. And it just frees up that time for your own career development and giving yourself that time and space to make more of an impact within your role. So this is actually something that we do under our Catalyst brand. We deliver a whole range of career skills workshops, and we can do this virtually. We can come on site at your business, and we can deliver them face to face as well. And the meetings one, it's always a really good workshop. People take a lot away from it, and generally will go away with a plan to run more effective meetings. So if you or your team requires support around running effective meetings, then get in touch with us. And as usual, we hope you've enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And please do share it with anyone that you think might also find it useful. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.